97% of applications use open source software in some capacity, highlighting how dependent modern software ecosystems are on the community maintained code. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead and principal analyst of the application development practice. I'm joined by Dan from Chainguard. Dan, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You want to introduce yourself and introduce Chainguard?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Dan Lorenc, the co-founder and CEO of Chainguard. We're a little over 4 years old now, and I spent about 10 years at Google before we got this company started. But we're trying to build a safe source for open source software. Like you just mentioned, 97% of organizations everywhere are using it. The other 3% probably just don't know it yet. And open source is great. It's the most secure, easiest, fastest way to build software, and that's why it's everywhere. But it does come with its own challenges, and we're going to talk about some of them today.
Absolutely. Well, great to have you on. Super important topic here today. When we talk about Ingress and NGINX retirement, it's really exposing a growing fault line, really in open source, as we were talking about it. But like, what happens here with critical infrastructure where it outlives people maintaining it? It's a really important conversation to have. So in this episode, we're really looking to explore the open source maintainer burnout crisis, the risk of orphan projects, and a sustainable next chapter for open source stewardship, what it could look like. So Dan, let's just jump right into this, because this is an important topic, especially when we start looking at these new offerings and such, and products that are built on top of it. But Ingress and NGINX kind of recently reached its natural end of life as a maintainer lifecycle. What does this mean, and what do you think? What are your thoughts around it?
Yeah, this kind of thing happens all the time, right? Ingress NGINX was a plugin, basically, is the easiest way to explain it, for Kubernetes. Kubernetes is not this batteries included platform. It's a platform for building platforms. And when people try to use it, which almost everyone building cloud platforms today is, you have to assemble your own kind of way of using it based on all of these other components like this. Ingress NGINX was a really early one, so it was adopted very, very widely. The Kubernetes project moves really quickly, right? It's got tons of developers, it's got tons of maintainers, tons of companies sponsoring it. And eventually some of these things that were introduced early on are no longer relevant, because you can kind of conglomerate a bunch of other features and plugins that are more recent and replace that functionality. And that's basically what happened here with Ingress NGINX. It's not really terribly relevant anymore if you're standing up something from scratch. A bunch of core components have replaced it. And the maintainers, at the end of the day, were done maintaining it. They decided to move on. And they announced this to the world. And you were telling me before we got on that, yeah, people kind of panicked at KubeCon when this news came out, because a lot of people had built up platforms using that at the core. And now all of a sudden they have to go figure out what their plan is. One of the other interesting points of Ingress NGINX, right? This thing is sitting at the edge of the cluster. Ingress means, things coming in. It's not a component that's buried down deep inside with no network access, where you might not have to worry about security as much. The things out there at the perimeter are front and center for attacks, and so those are really critical to the security of everything running inside of it. So when something like that gets end of life, and people are unsure if they're going to be able to patch it, that's where things get scary.
No, absolutely. I think that's what we have to kind of understand, what the life cycle and the roadmap looks like. But when we look at this particular scenario here, what does the retirement really tell us about the current sustainability model for critical open source infrastructure? And why are projects still widely used for reaching this point of, where they're using these technology stacks or areas, and they're kind of caught off guard to some extent on when something does retire? I get it that things change a lot, but isn't there some kind of way to understand this before it goes end of life?
Yeah, I think there's a couple themes that are kind of new intersecting, which is why this is becoming such a big issue, and why this one in particular is such a big issue. First of all, it's great that the maintainers told everyone that this is going to be end of life, and that they gave them a bunch of notice. They didn't just shut it off that day. A lot of projects go unmaintained without anyone even saying anything. You'll see lots of infrastructure, lots of libraries, lots of things like this that have just been put on the internet, and people are happily using them for 10 years. And you don't know if it's end of life or not, because there's no work going on in there, maybe because there doesn't need to be work going on in there. The project could just be done and finished and useful. You don't know until a critical vulnerability comes out, and whether or not somebody is there to merge that patch. And so telling everyone up front is great. It signals that it's time to move on. They gave people a quarter, 3 months, 4 months, something like that notice. The second part of this phenomenon is now a lot of regulations exist that kind of put teeth around that. Organizations are under a lot of pressure to not use end-of-life software, whether it's proprietary or open source. I always get terrified when I walk around in an airport and one of those TVs is doing the blue screen of death showing like a Windows XP login screen. That's been end of life for decades and people are still running it. And I think we can kind of continue to keep paying Microsoft for patches at some point, but every year they try to kill it and end up taking more money to keep this thing around. So it's not really just an open source phenomenon, but it's this new pressure saying you're not allowed to run anything end of life.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
When that happens,
for
a project like this, it causes panic.
Yeah, we're seeing this across, like you mentioned, regulations. I mean, with the new EU CRA and all sorts of things that are coming up, you can't use these end of life products. But when we look at, some of the areas here where we see that data is more than 60% of open source maintainers have quit or considering quitting.
Yeah.
Is this burnout from maintainer burnout? Is it normal? Is it just accelerating? What are your thoughts here?
Well, it's a funny term. Quitting what? It's not a job, right? It's not like somebody signed and you're putting in your 2 weeks notice. There's no single answer to any of this, right? People contribute to open source and build projects for hundreds of reasons. And there's never any obligation to ever keep doing future work. And so when somebody says they're quitting, it means that, they're telling everyone that they're not going to keep doing that. But the beauty of open source is that the source is still there and anyone else can just take it and continue to do that work if they want to. So that's a big safety hatch you have as an organization where you could do that work yourself if you wanted to, unlike proprietary software or a lot of these other ways.
Yeah, and I think when I agree with you that when we see these widely open adopted open source projects becoming orphaned, sometimes people say there's clearly not a clear next step. But to your point, there really is, right? It's like you can pick up where that was left off. And you can continue. It doesn't have to be, like you said, they're not quote quitting a job, right? But I think that there is an expectation of saying, like, if somebody's going to start something, what's the succession plan for that piece? Is that in line with what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think culturally that's sort of what's happened. I don't think that's a fair expectation, though. And I think that's kind of the cause of a lot of this burnout. These maintainers feel this external pressure that, people are using this. I have to keep fixing these bugs. I have to keep doing this. But they don't have to. At the end of the day, there's no contractual obligation. Every open source license has those things at the top that says you're using this, assuming all risk. This comes with no warranties, no liabilities, anything like that. And I think that's kind of the framing that we kind of have to shift to. And a lot of organizations they get entitled. They think people have been doing this for free for years. And if they stop or they do something I don't like, I get to go onto their GitHub and yell at them. And you see a lot of those horror stories too. And people don't like dealing with that. And I think that does contribute to the burnout in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I also do think that has kind of opened up that model of, open source contribution to projects, but also enterprise level support for projects. So if commercialized products are in place, they own that maintenance. So I think that's really where there's kind of a good kind of approach to an alternative. It becomes commercialized, but of course you're going to have to pay for it at that point, right? So that's an interesting perspective. But let's talk about Chainguard though, because you launched, Emirate OSS as a stable home for these archived or abandoned projects. What does that mean?
Yeah. So once again, the beauty of open source is that the source is there. And when somebody else says they're done with it, anybody else can take it and keep doing that work if they want to. You're free to modify this stuff. You're free to redistribute it. You're free to use it for any purpose. And these projects, when something like Ingress NGINX happens, it causes panic inside organizations because they have to get off it now or in the next quarter. They already have plans 18 months out. I heard a stat from a huge financial services institution that they had close to 1,000 teams that had to change their roadmaps to get off of this quickly. That's disruptive to the business. And when everyone is using something like this and that disruption happens all at the same time, it's an opportunity for us to help out. We can continue to take that on and do that patching and do that maintenance. We've been doing this already at Chainguard. We have something like 100,000 different open source packages that we do security work on in our automated software factory. So taking this on isn't a huge load for us, and it's valuable for us because we rely on this stuff too. We do that in a way that helps our customers. You shouldn't have hundreds of thousands of organizations wasting time doing the same thing at the same time. It's kind of economies of scale here.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think I want to give the audience here that's watching, should they be thinking about, or enterprises and developers alike, should they be thinking differently about life cycle of open source software? Like, should they think about it? Because now there's like ways to kind of protect what they're building. And, I can see, like, from as a former developer, I would develop code. They spend a lot of time building something, and then it's kind of painful when something doesn't work anymore, right? And you try to work it. But so should they think about it differently?
Yeah, I think what the last couple of years in open source have kind of taught us is that it's a saying that I like to repeat, but open source is free as in puppy, not free as in beer, right? Free beer is great. You can go drink one. It's great. A free puppy, though, on the other hand, like, you think twice before you adopt that free puppy. Looking at it, that it might be cute, but you're going to have to take that out. You're going to have to pick up the poop. You're going to have to feed it. You're going to have to get it water every day. It's a different way of paying for this stuff. You're not paying for a license up front, but you are paying a lot to keep and update and secure and migrate off all of this open source that people are running.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that analogy because you're right. I mean, it is something that needs to be maintained, right? And it is something but I also think it's one of those things where a lot of people will move towards open source because they want to, build their own or do it DIY. But again, there's options, right? You can do a DIY scenario, you can build it yourself, but you do own it, right? You do own it. And if you don't want to own it, then sure, you can take a buy approach and have a faster time to value and have and not have to own it. Getting that call at 2:00 in the morning if something goes wrong, you don't have to figure it out yourself. You can actually call on enterprise level support. So there's kind of a pros and cons approach here. And I think that that's something that, organizations need to weigh out. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. And I think at the end of the day, people are going to keep using open source, even with this in mind. The TCO calculation is different. It's not zero compared to a piece of proprietary software, but it's better. Open source moves faster. It's more secure. Patching happens faster than proprietary software. People are going to use open source because it's better, not because it's cheaper. Yeah,
that makes sense. So let's talk about some of those projects, right? We have Chainguard has a soft landing zone for some of these new projects. What are some of the projects that Chainguard has stepped into that you may be supporting? That acts as a good stewardship along the stages of the project lifecycle.
Yeah, the Ingress NGINX one is probably the biggest example, but I think we have around a dozen or so today of different, mostly in the CNCF kind of KubeCon space so far. That's a fast-moving space, and there's been a lot of experimentation happening there. And depending on when you started your journey, some of the projects you picked might not be around anymore. But we're trying to expand this, and we're trying to scale this and see how it works. And back to that kind of maintainer burnout question, right now we're doing this post-hoc. People have announced that they're archiving these things, and we kind of come in after that. But I'd love if we could shift that conversation even earlier and make people not feel bad about end-of-lifing these projects, or not feel bad about moving on if they're maintaining them. And if you look all the way back to the XZ-Utils attack a couple of years ago, that was a case where something like this, if it had existed, I think could have helped prevent it. That was a maintainer that had been building a core cryptography library for close to 10 plus years that's used everywhere. And eventually this person was done maintaining it. And a volunteer had come on the mailing list and just started helping it. It was one person solo for 10 years. Somebody else showed up and started doing good work, started fixing tests, started fixing bugs, that kind of thing. When the original maintainer said, all right, I'm done with this now. I'm tired. I'm going to hand it to you. You can keep maintaining it. Within a month, that person slipped malware in. It turned out not to be a person. It was a fake name. All of this happened. If we had a central and trusted place for this, where maintainers didn't feel bad about handing something off because they knew it would be taken care of, we could prevent some of those things from happening earlier.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a trusted location makes you feel better about what you're working on, right? And like you said, if it's not known where it's being handed off, it makes it a little bit more challenging. There's a lot to think about here, Dan. And you offered up a lot of kind of insights to what's happening. For the audience, what would you advise the audience? Where would they go to learn more? How would they get going and started? Or if they're even hesitant on certain things, like we mentioned compliance, regulations, and governance, where would they go? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we've got a ton of materials up on our website, chainguard.dev. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Dan Lorenc. That's spelled Lorenc. We're posting about this stuff all the time. It's what we do every day.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, this has been great. Awesome insights. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. Thank you for joining us. And a big thank you to all of you who tuned in. We do appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talent shaping the future of application development. So whether you're deploying at the edge, building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. So be sure to follow us on social if you have any thoughts, questions, or just want to connect. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.